Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lavella Kindidalaja from Public Administration C 2020. My topic for today is modes of policy legitimation. There are 7 forms of policy legitimation: numinous legitimacy, civil, input, output, and throughput, negative and positive, instrumental and substantive, perceived, and lastly, foundational and contingent. The first legitimation is the numinous legitimacy. In a theocracy, government legitimacy derives from the spiritual authority of a god or a goddess. In ancient Egypt, the legitimacy of a dominion of a pharaoh or god or king was theologically established by a doctrine that posited the pharaoh as the Egyptian patron, god Horus, son of Osiris. So, from the word itself, it focuses on spiritual or religious authority, for example, like in Roman Catholics, the Ten Commandments.
The second legitimation is civil legitimacy. The political legitimacy of a civil government derives from agreement among autonomous constituent institutions, legislative, judicial, and executive, combined for the national common good. One way civil society grants legitimacy to governments is through public elections. There are also those who refute the legitimacy offered by public elections, pointing out that the amount of legitimacy public elections can grant depends significantly on the electoral system conducting the elections. In the United States, this issue has surfaced around how voting is impacted by gerrymandering. The United States Electoral College's ability to produce winners by minority rule and discouragement of voter turnout outside of swing states, and the repeal of part of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. In other words, civil legitimacy is practiced during elections. Example is yung pinaka-previous na elections, which is nag-elect tayo from president to local officials. And then 3 years from now, kakaroon ulit tayo ng elections to elect local officials. The third legitimation is input, output, and throughput legitimacy. Assessing the political legitimacy of a government can be done by looking at 3 different aspects of which a government can derive legitimacy. Fritz Karff introduced 2 normative criteria, which are output legitimacy, or the effectiveness of policy outcomes for people, and input legitimacy, or the responsiveness to citizen concerns as a result of participation by the people. A third normative criterion was added by Vivian Smith, who analyzes legitimacy also in terms of what she calls throughput, or the governance process that happened in between input and output. The fourth legitimation is negative and positive legitimacy. Abuloff distinguishes between negative political legitimacy, which is about the object of legitimation, or answering what is legitimate, and positive political legitimacy, which is about the source of legitimation, or answering who is the legitimator. Negative and positive legitimacy is concerned with establishing where to draw the line between good and bad. From the NPL perspective, political legitimacy emanates from appropriate actions. From a PPL perspective, it emanates from the appropriate actors. In the social contract tradition, Hobbes and Locke focused on NPL, stressing security and liberty respectively, while Rousseau focused more on PPL, or the people as the legitimator. Arguably, political stability depends on both forms of legitimacy. The fifth legitimation is instrumental and substantive legitimacy. Weber's understanding of legitimacy rests on shared values such as tradition and rational legality. But policies that aim at reconstructing legitimacy by improving the service delivery or output of a state often only respond to shared needs. Therefore, substantive sources of legitimacy need to be distinguished from more instrumental ones. Instrumental legitimacy rests on the rational assessment of the usefulness of an authority, describing to what extent an authority responds to shared needs. Instrumental legitimacy is very much based on the perceived effectiveness of service delivery. Conversely, substantive legitimacy is a more abstract normative judgment which is underpinned by shared values. If a person believes that an entity has the right to exercise social control, he or she may also accept personal disadvantages. The sixth legitimation is perceived legitimacy. Establishing legitimacy is not simply transactional. Service provision, election, and rule of law do not automatically grant legitimacy. State legitimacy rests on citizens' perception and expectations of the state, and these are co-constructed between state actors and citizens. What legitimizes a state is also contextually specific. McCullough showed that different countries' provision of different services build state legitimacy. In Nepal, public water provision was most associated with state legitimacy, while in Pakistan, it was health services. The last legitimation is foundational and contingent legitimacy. Political theorist Ross Mitiga has proposed an alternative typology consisting of two parts, foundational and contingent legitimacy. According to Mitiga, foundational legitimacy pertains to a government's ability to ensure safety and security of its citizens, while contingent legitimacy obtains in situations in which governments exercise power in acceptable ways. On the other hand, Mitiga acknowledges that there is extensive debate about which factors are relevant to contingent legitimacy, but argues that among the most commonly defended factors are the presence of democratic rights and processes, consent, guarantees of equal representation, provision of core public benefits, protection of basic individual rights and freedoms, social justice, and observance of fairness principles. Mitiga specifies further that most contemporary theorists maintain that legitimacy requires multiple of these factors, some of which are procedural and others are substantive.